Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Dead Man Walking Podcast. I'm your host, Repeatedly Dead Fred, author of the medical trauma memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is what happened to me, and that's how I got the name Repeatedly Dead Fred. Today, I am thrilled to have with me Humble and Fred. And for people in the radio market of Toronto for the last 30 odd years, these guys are legendary. They're one of the most successful morning show hosts ever. And I can't wait to talk to them and hear a little bit more about their story. So, Humble,
Yeah.
Fred.
Well, thank you.
Anytime.
I know Fred's, both of us are racing to tell you that, we've been pronounced repeatedly dead many, many times ourselves. At least our careers have been.
Although I like that word ever, just 4 letters, but he said, well, the most popular or one of the most, whatever it was, ever. That sounded pretty strong and
It's
makes
very
you feel
aggressive.
good, Howie. Ever.
Well,
we're happy you asked us to be on your program, and happy that you're still alive.
Yeah, me too. This would be a really bad interview if I wasn't alive. So,
now, do we have a history or something? You worked in the radio industry at all or something or like that?
No, I'm
okay.
Just
all right.
Wrote my book and decided to create the podcast as a spinoff.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Fred Patterson, let me ask you a question. Have you and I worked together? Our paths cross somewhere in the radio industry?
Oh, many times. Yeah, some might argue too often.
35 years, by the way. Other Fred. I'll call you Other Fred now.
Sure.
Dead Fred. Yeah, Fred and I have been working together 35 years as of a week ago, 2 weeks ago or so. Yeah.
Oh, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was a little pocket in there where we were separated and miserable for that.
Oh my God.
It was awful. We were miserable for those few years, but back at it and having more fun now, Fred, than ever before.
It's hard calling somebody your own name, isn't it?
Yeah,
So, did you guys know each other before you were paired together, or how did you get paired together?
Well, I'll answer the first question because it's easy. No, we did not. Fred, you can answer the longer question.
Okay.
Of how we got put together.
I was working at CFNY 102.1, the Spirit of Radio, in Brampton. But at the time, even considered a Toronto station, we were broadcasting off the CN Tower. And I was working with Pete and Geets, again, a legendary morning show in Toronto, and they left. That broke up. So they had a series of morning men come in, and none really stuck. And then we had a program director named Danny Kingsbury, a fine man, came in to run the radio station and wanted to put a morning show together. And he knew of a morning show in Montreal called Jeff Lumby and Howard Glassman. They had a history together, Danny and the morning show, these two individuals. And he tried to lure them both to Toronto, to CFNY. Jeff said no. Howard said yes. And then I had been working sort of as a sidekick on all the morning shows that blew through CFNY after Pete and Geets. And Danny thought, hey, maybe Fred and Howard would be a good fit. So one day they flew me to Montreal. I met Howard. We had a lovely afternoon, a nice lunch, and determined that, yeah, we could probably do this. And the rest is history. Is that good?
That's pretty accurate. So this guy that hired me, I had worked together for many years. We had all worked together. This guy, Danny Kingsbury, who was Fred's boss at the time, was a friend of mine, a colleague of mine from years gone by. And I had just gotten back into radio. I'd been out of radio for about 4 years. I was living in California. I was doing stand-up. And then I got back into radio. And very shortly, like 15 months after I came back to the business, this lunch happened where they offered me and this other friend of ours the actual morning show. And I guess the idea was we'd be the morning show and Fred would be the guy doing sports on our show. And it was apparent at this lunch that the other guy had no desire to move from Montreal to Toronto. He had a good gig there. And I was kind of like the second guy in the show and I wasn't making a lot of money. And And frankly, I loved Montreal, but I had back in the business, I figured that if you were going to compete, you needed to be in Toronto.
Mhm.
And shortly after Fred and I met, not that long, I guess, a couple months after we met and I was hired, we started working together August 8th, 1989. And but for a couple of years, we've been working together ever since. And I would just say one last thing too. Within a very, very, and I mean like within a few days, if I said we're a rom-com, it would be, it was love at first sight. But what the love was, is we had an instant connection that our sense of humor was very similar.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with Fred, as I've mentioned, many, many years, and including the first show and the most recent show, which we recorded only a few hours ago. I've rarely done a show with Fred where I haven't laughed. And that first few days, first few weeks, part of it was nervousness, but we laughed so much. And so that was the instant connection. We thought, hey, if we can make each other laugh, I wonder if we're making the audience laugh. And apparently it turned out that we were.
Mm-hmm. So
and does that answer any of your questions, repeatedly dead, Fred?
Not at all, but that's okay. Did you know at the lunch you had that chemistry, or did it take a few weeks into the show?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be cool to say, "Oh yeah, no, right?" No, it was nervous. It was a nervous time. I mean, for me and for Howard, because you don't really know till you're sitting in the room, right? And the mics are on.
But what I did know is this: the guy that was putting us together, I trusted him.
Instincts, yeah.
Yeah, I knew him, and I knew his sense of humor. And he was saying to me, Freddie's the guy. He's really funny. So a guy that I thought was a guy that I respected, and I also connected with his sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
He was telling me that Fred and I would work out together.
Yeah, like irreverent, often dark, self-deprecating, all those things.
Very often dark.
That we enjoy. Yeah.
So, Fred, how hard was it for you to going like sort of, this might not be the right phrase, the bit player in the morning show to being like part of the main team?
How do I answer that? Well, here's the thing. I was the sportscaster at CFNY exclusively. I used to do the odd thing with Pete and Yeats, and then they left. And they brought a series of morning men in, and one in particular, Steve Anthony, who you may know. He was working at Much Music at the time, and they thought it was a good idea to have Steve Anthony do the morning show, work at Much Music all day, and then work the morning show at CFNY the next morning. Well, it was a lot for Steve to digest and handle. It just was. And often he would come in the morning, maybe not as prepared as he should be. So he would lean on me. And I found myself in the booth more often with Steve, sort of being the sidekick or, him playing off me. And this started to condition me for that. And then after Steve, there was a couple of others. And I sort of got my chops that way. So by the time Howard came, I felt pretty comfortable. I felt pretty comfortable.
And the way the show worked when we first started, we were playing music. I think, the first year of the Humble and Fred show, we were probably playing, a minimum of 7 songs an hour. So, we both had our duties. Fred was still doing sports at the top and the bottom of every hour. I was talking in between songs and setting up the promotions and being the disc jockey. And our actual Humble and Fred interaction was only probably a couple breaks per half hour where we would stop down and air some stuff out. But the rest of the time, both of us sort of had our own jobs.
Yeah. And I can honestly say I've been in the industry over 40 years now. And it's sort of unique for a guy to come out of college. I've never back sold a record. I haven't, because I just jumped out of college right basically into major market as a sportscaster, and then as a sidekick per se, co-host, whatever. And I just never have. And,
Like
a lot of guys.
even at your college station, you didn't take like a disc jockey shift once in a while, or no?
No, I did. I mostly worked in the news department and stuff. And when I say that professionally, I've never back sold a song.
Well, if you've ever heard me do it, apparently I haven't done it professionally either.
Listen, and I'm not complaining, because that, you can have fun with that, but that's a lot of maintenance. And
well, and then here's the thing, Dead Fred, it was something that I did, before I did a morning show. I did my 10,000 hours as just a regular disc jockey.
Yeah.
Talking in and out of songs, setting up promotions, all of that became, something I did sort of second nature. But I became a morning man very early on. Like, I was the guy running a morning show at a major market station in Vancouver when I was 21 years old. So by the time I got to Toronto, I'd been a morning guy in 4 different markets. Excuse me. And I kind of knew I had that part down. Run a show, all that stuff. I was pretty experienced, even though when we started, I was 29 years old. But I had been doing mornings a long time.
And it was that whole thing. Howard, in his position as the main jock, was often the initiator. I was the reactor. But as we became more comfortable together, I could learn after he had back sold and we were ready for the break. Sometimes I can initiate things knowing how he would react. And that's I really part of the Humble and Fred magic. Yes, I'm going to call it magic.
Yes, we have magic.
We know how to pull each other's chains. We know almost instinctively how the other guy's going to react to something. You know what I mean? So I see a story, he sees a story. It's like, to anybody else on earth, I think, no big deal. But if I tell that story to Howard, I know what's going to happen.
And that's something for the record, that you are you're very gentle when you pull my chain, that you're very, you're very.
I think that's a different interview we're talking about.
You're not selfish. You're not selfish. You're very caring. No, I mean, that's what I mean when I say, the very first time we were on the air together, that first week, we just sort of instinctively had a sense of the absurd and things that, we like I said, I don't know how else to put it. We share a sense of humor, and to this very day, he can make me laugh. He makes me laugh all the time. I can make him laugh, and I know
likewise.
I know what makes him laugh.
Yeah,
you do sound so much like a rom-com.
Seriously.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's and you know what? We have never, I don't think, ever done a break, and this isn't now. Back in the radio days where, you'd play the 2 songs and then come off and have 3 to 4 minutes. I don't think we ever did a break where I'll say this and you say that, or I'll say this and then you say, we just never did that. And you can tell when morning shows do that. And a lot of them do that. We never did.
So if we go back,
go ahead. I was going to say, the only thing we ever did is you might say, listen, I'm going to bring this up.
Yes.
Just let me get, because both of us want to jump in. We might say, listen, I'm going to bring this up. Just let me get to this part first before you come in, because I know you're going to. I'm sorry, Dad. Fred, what did you want to say?
I was going to ask, if you were indeed a rom-com, which characters would you be? Like, would one of you be Jen Aniston and the other Adam Sandler? Or?
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. Okay. I would be Adam Sandler only because I'm Hebrew, and he would be Jennifer only because he loves Jennifer Aniston. He would like to wear her skin.
Yes.
I can see the resemblances. Yes.
I'd make love to myself.
That's right. If he were Jennifer Aniston, he wouldn't be doing this interview right now.
I'd want a limber Jennifer Aniston. Yes.
Okay. So were either of you actual music fans when you got in the biz, or were you more into, you wanted the radio career?
Well, I can answer that. I was, I liked music as a kid. I played piano, played guitar, and I had some little garage bands, but I was singularly focused on wanting to be a comedian. And comedy was all that was my thing. I was like a comedy nerd. Listened to comedy records, quoted them, watched comics on TV. Radio was like this thing I fell into when I heard one guy on the radio in my small town of Moose Jaw being funny on the radio, I thought, wow, I never even considered that.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've said a few times in interviews, when I worked at CFNY, which became, The Edge, at the time, I didn't appreciate what the music meant to the people that listened to the radio station. But over time, I've come to appreciate it in a way that, a younger version of myself didn't. But to answer your question full circle, yeah, I mean, I'm a music fan because I've been playing it for 45 years, but it's not what drove me into the business. And I don't think it was your entree either.
No. I was a sports nut. Loved being a sportscaster. Plus, the day part plays a big part. When you're doing a morning show and you're playing two songs, and then again, all the maintenance, the weather, the traffic, the sports, the news, the funny, you don't have a lot of time to be listening to the music while it's on. You're preparing for the next bit. And that radio station, pretty much any other day part, the focus was the music. The guys, played the music, talked about the people who made the music. That wasn't the nature of the beast, even for the morning show at CFNY. It just wasn't. And I've personally never worked in that environment, obviously not being a disc jockey per se. Howard has, I haven't. But we played a lot of great music, though, at CFNY. At the time, a lot of people considered it weird, but here we are 30, 40 years later, and a lot of that music that was weird at the time is now, memory music on a lot of stations you wouldn't think it should be or would be, but it is.
And I like the music. I got to, I've always said, if I could have done my morning show at a country music station, I would have if I had been hired. Sure. But I was lucky along the way. I worked at an AOR station in Vancouver, CFOX, which is, album-oriented rock. Then I worked at a sort of an alternative station in Calgary. Then I worked at an alternative station for most of my career in Toronto. But I also worked at CKFM in Toronto, which became Boom. And, that's a different type of format. And that music seemed to kind of go along with my vibe and our vibe. But I wasn't one of those guys that, would talk about the third cut on the Springsteen album.
No.
So me and Fred and I just wanted the song to end so we could make little fart jokes.
Yeah, and that was
hilarious.
And through the years, Fred, we were after management to let us talk more and play less music, but through the 90s into the early 2000s, it's just not what was done in Canada. They had started doing it in the States quite a bit, maybe one or two songs an hour and let the jocks go, but we could never, ever get that freedom. And it was frustrating and aggravating. All these years later, we know that probably would have been the way to go for several reasons. But
well, we were by 2005. Let me back up. When we left the Edge to go to Mojo, which was a talk station owned by the company that we worked for, we had been that heritage. We were the heritage morning show at that radio station.
Yeah,
and there was no doubt, statistically, ratings wise, that we were the reason people were listening in the morning. Yes, they liked Crowded House and Pearl Jam, and that's great. But all we wanted to do, when we were playing 6 songs an hour by that time, all we wanted was to cut it back a couple songs. And if anyone could have made an argument that we deserved it, that we had earned it, we thought we had, which I think also kind of contributed to our, desire to go to talk radio, because we got to a point in our lives where we thought, okay, we don't want to just talk to, we would have a guest on. I always use this as an example, so it's a story I've told before, but we had Dave Grohl on our show.
Oh, and couldn't you get an A-lister?
Yeah, exactly. We had him on. Hey, Dead Fred, we had him on several times. But we had Dave Grohl on the show, and I remember going to our boss saying, Dave Grohl, can we not talk to him for more than 5 minutes before we have to play a song? He goes, no, 5 or 6 minutes. Like, there's just no getting around the fact that people would have been able to withstand a 15-minute break, but we just never got to do it.
And there was also the train of thought that if people thought CFNY, there was this funny, engaging morning show, but it was at the station that played the weird music. Maybe if we played a little less of what was perceived as the weird music, which it wasn't, but perceived by many, play a little less of that. We talk more. That, that might be a winning formula for mounting an audience, but we never found out.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that no matter what industry you are in, certain management just can't see the forest through the trees, and they can't see how much more value you would have added in the format you presented, and it wouldn't have harmed the rest of the station. Like there's just, money to be made, and their egos
But if I
Well,
may
some
just
guys don't
interject,
like to leave the playbook, so to speak.
that's what I was going to
Yeah.
say. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
It was more a matter of the people we were working for were like, okay, we're doing this. Ratings are good. The money's great. We don't feel the need to change it.
Mhm.
But where I was going before, by 2005, there were very few FM morning shows in the biggest markets in North America, except for Toronto, where morning shows were playing any music. Stern, Opie and Anthony, all the big jocks. And I'm talking about markets, not just New York, Chicago, LA, Cincinnati, Midwesterns like Indianapolis. None of those shows were playing music. And all these years later, I don't know, we have a podcast now and have had one for 13 years, which in podcast terms is like the Marconis. So what we've been able to prove to ourselves over and over again is that we can engage an audience. We talk for between an hour and a half and 2 hours and 15 minutes every day. That's like a 4-hour, 5-hour morning show with music. And our audience has never been more engaged, more connected with us than they are now.
I often use the analogy. You look at Howard Stern. Howard Stern's great. You can't argue the greatest of all time, blah, 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 blah. But who deserves credit is the guy that one day decided, let this guy go. Just let him go and see where it takes us. Because I don't think Howard Stern's very funny. I think he's very adventurous and took a lot of risks, to his credit. A lot of the stuff to me was sort of mindless, but what it was it struck a chord at the time because he did what radio wasn't supposed to do. So the person that made the decision, it wasn't his decision. The person that made the decision that this guy wants to do this, and yeah, he's a bit demented and whatever. Let's let him go and see what happens. And well, we saw what happened. I bet you there was 100 Howard Sterns out there. Maybe guys funnier, do better bits. Never got the chance.
And I've always thought that was a great point, and I've heard him make that point before, and I agree with it. That somebody had to say, okay, for one rating period, we're going to let this guy go. And not that this is the biggest gripe of our career, because it's not, but it is sort of indicative of, had we been given a little bit more latitude. And as I said, after 10 years, we deserved it. We were making them a lot of money. Our ratings were good. They were great, in fact. And the audience loved our show. Yes, they liked the music, but our show was what they identified with. And again, we always have to say, we're not as good as Stern, but who knows? We were in third or fourth largest market in North America. Who knows what could have happened? We could have been syndicated. Listen, we were on Sirius XM for 5 years, listened to by people all over North America that had no idea we did a morning show in Toronto and liked our show.
So what is the biggest gripe of your career then?
How long is this podcast?
What? Gripe?
Yes.
Regret? What are you talking about? Gripe?
No, we don't really have a lot of gripes, I don't think.
Well, Humble said this isn't the biggest gripe of our career, so.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know what would the biggest gripe be. That might be it.
Okay.
Yeah, just not them not unhooking the chains a bit. That's all. Yeah.
And I think, again, that's pretty common across a lot of industries, that people just don't get the chance to excel. If
Mhm.
you're a
Yeah.
sports analogy, your coach
Mhm.
sees you as a fourth line grinder, even though you can score like anybody else, that's where you're
No,
going to be.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's out of convenience,
But yeah, it would
Yeah.
be unfair to say that we didn't like working for the people we worked for.
Oh,
'Cause
no.
we had some great bosses,
Mhm.
and we got great support to whatever degree they could support us.
Mhm.
We were
Yes.
treated well. They paid us well, and we made a couple of moves that
Yeah.
things may have gone a different direction, but in the end, he's 68, I'm 64. For the last 13 years, we've been our own bosses.
Right.
And however the radio career shook out, we could have never imagined that all these years later, he and I are still doing a show. And just
Mhm.
before you came on and started recording, I was just looking at my notes for tomorrow, going, "Oh, I can't wait to tell Fred this thing that I forgot to
Mhm.
do today." So that's not bad.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Timing and fate is a huge thing in this business too, because we're just clicking along at the edge, CF and Y, and then we get a general manager who is a legendary cheeseball on the air, right? And even walking around the halls, just a cheeseball. Well, now he's the general manager, and how does he look upon the Humble and Fred show? Not such a big fan. Doesn't really get it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
The irreverence, the dark humor, I will say it, the intelligent humor, edgy
Mhm.
humor, didn't quite get it. So all of a sudden, you're in this situation where you're trying to justify yourself, or you get this feeling that this guy's not really into us like the last guy was, and that sucks. And
Mhm.
when you're in a position like that, then you start thinking of other things like, should you go somewhere else? Would it be better over there? How do we push back against this guy? So now instead of focusing on your show every day, you got this to deal with. And I know
Yeah.
that applies to a ton of businesses, but often in radio, when it comes to talent and performing, that sucks, man. When you're not totally focused in the morning, when you're putting on a show, especially a comedy show,
Mhm.
and you're not like just totally focused on that, you got to worry about some dick in the hall. It sucks, but
Mhm.
it's happened to many.
By the way, Dick in the Hall, not as popular as Kids in
Yeah.
the Hall, but
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was and again, our business, as you've pointed out, is no different than any other business.
No.
There are, there's management and there's talent, there's people. We worked in an office. Yeah, we put on this goofy show every morning, but at 9:30 or 10 when we were done, we walked into an office full of people doing things like anybody else in downtown Toronto. And yeah, like our fates were sort of altered a little bit by, as Fred just said, by this guy's opinion of us. And he couldn't really fire us because the radio station, the people above him, were big fans of ours, and they were the ones we signed the contract with. But him not being a big fan of the show, it definitely got us kind of thinking that maybe we should find some other place to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked to Mark Breslin a few months ago, and he talked about, he produced the Joan Rivers show, and we talked about some of the great comedians and how good a comedian Jay Leno actually is.
Yeah.
And he wasn't allowed to be a great comedian when he took over the Tonight Show. He had those, many of the constraints that you guys are talking about.
Well, I got to tell you, I've said this to Fred. When I was a comedian in Los Angeles, Jay Leno was the gold standard.
Mhm.
The pre Tonight Show, the frequent guest on Letterman's show, Leno of the mid '80s was the sharpest. He was the funniest. He had the best name a subject. He had the best joke, and that persona that he took on the Tonight Show was disappointing for me. I was a big Leno fan.
Mhm.
And all that crap with Letterman and such. But yeah, like, it was similar to our situation. But this guy got hired and we were gone within a couple of years.
Mhm.
Yeah, who you work for definitely can impact the kind of show you're allowed to do.
And not only that, I mean, not to get too into it, and then we went to the mix, and there was a lot of meddling there, and it really affected me. And it was like I would sit there in the morning and trying to be funny and do bits and breaks and stuff that had worked on CFNY. It was almost impossible because you're second guest and sort of changed the format not long after we got there. And yeah, you just can't do it. I mean, I couldn't. Maybe some can, but what I was trained to do or conditioned to do couldn't do it. And it was all based on all the bullshit around us. Everybody had an opinion. A consultant from Cleveland with longer fingernails and a pencil mustache. Like, seriously. And this guy's sitting there, has no idea about the Toronto market, but they hire the guy to come in and tell us how we should be doing our show after we've just done it for 15 years with a good measure of success, you know?
So now you're big time podcasters.
Yes.
And
Yes, we are.
have you been able to have the, the 7, 10, 15-minute interviews with the people you want to have on?
Yeah, we do whatever we want. We, we generally, we have our own format of the show. We did, we usually do 15 or 20-minute interviews. We had, unless it's somebody, we had Dave Thomas on recently. We did 45 minutes.
Wow.
The format of the Humble and Fred show now is whatever we want it to be.
Yeah, when we first started doing it, the long interviews titillated us. But as Howard said, we're the Marconis. And as this medium has grown, everybody's doing long interviews. So you sort of have to carve out your niche, you know what I mean? And a lot of podcasts that are just long interviews, a lot of the people that do those don't have the ability that we do outside of an interview to talk to each other and keep it going and make each other laugh and hopefully make the audience laugh. And it's so again, when we first started doing it, sometimes like we had Howard Peter Mansbridge for over an hour, and
yeah.
I'm not so sure we would do that now because everybody else is doing that. So we would probably have Mansbridge in for 20, 25 minutes, maybe 30, but sort of go at him differently than everybody else would, you know?
When we started, we had a series of pretty famous guests, people that, either had heard of us or were kind enough to agree to come visit us. We had built a studio. We had lots of famous people, Mansbridge, Anne Murray, Alex Lifeson. So, yeah, and it was also, we kind of, because we were a little bit, like all the shackles were off, we were doing 45, 50-minute, an hour-long. Why we don't do that now is because we've learned over time that what the audience really wants, and actually more important than that, what we really want is to do the show really now without anybody else. We, we used to have guests 5 days a week. We used to do shows 5 days a week. Now we do them 4 days a week, 3 in the summer, because of golf. But of the 4 days a week we do shows, normally we only have guests on 2 of them. The other 2 shows, the Monday and Thursday show, are just us.
And because the Humble and Fred show, that's what we do. That's what the Humble and Fred show is, where a lot of the big podcasts now, like, Conan O'Brien and Smartless and on and on and on. It's just long form interviews where that's another thing about how the podcast has evolved, because earlier it was looked upon a way for people that were once in radio now find their own way and make a living. Well, fat chance. We've done all right because we went into it with a brand. What's happened to podcasting now? Filthy rich people are just getting more filthy rich off podcasts. Yeah. You know what I mean? So all these actors, like Ted Danson and
Woody Harrelson.
Woody Harrelson have just launched one. The guy's worth mega millions, and because it's them doing a podcast, all these companies are willing to just throw more money at them. Where the grassroots people, maybe people being a little more innovative and a little more creative, they're not making anything.
Well, I think a lot of the consumer products and the big advertisers, when they found they couldn't get any original programming during COVID, They said,
Mm.
we need to advertise somewhere.
Yep.
And they started
That's very
throwing
true.
money at like the Whitney
Yeah.
Cummings and the Andrew Schultzes and stuff like that. And now they've conditioned themselves. That's where we're going to put such a
And
big
speaking
chunk
of
of our
Andrew,
money.
I love Andrew Schultz, by the way, and I like Whitney Cummings. But there's a perfect example. Smartless launched during the pandemic.
Mhm.
I heard
Mhm.
talking about it the other day.
Because they were bored.
They were bored and they
Yeah.
had nothing to do. So, and they thought they would do it for 3 or 4 months. Little did they realize they were going to get paid $20 million a year to do this thing that they do once a week.
Mhm.
Our intention when we started it was because we hadn't done a show together in 4 or 5 years, and he was working
Yeah.
as a program director. I don't know if you knew that, Fred. You were
Program
director. And I was working
Yeah.
the morning show at Boom 97.3 in Toronto. I was back doing kind of a disc jockey show, and I
Mhm.
got fired. He got fired around the same time. And when we started, we thought, hey, we'll get the old band back together and we'll reintroduce our brand to the radio market, and we'll, maybe we'll get a job. Now, not to get into the weeds here, but we got a couple of radio jobs. But what we did is we kept recording this podcast every day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All the little syndicated things we did with
Okay.
Bell and
So program director, we're about to get cut off here.
okay.
So
Thanks for having us on.
can you log back in and we'll do a proper wrap?
Sure.
Okay. Thanks so much.
No worries. Log back in.
So here's the back end of another masterful edit on my part here with Humble and Fred. And guys, this has been so fascinating. Is there anything you want to end off with? Words of wisdom, motivation, how to keep ahead of the edge in your field?
No, although I had a thought
Mhm.
the other day. You may have heard they just literally shut down CHML 900 in Hamilton.
Hamilton, yeah.
They just turned the switch off. And then my mind, because I was one, Howard didn't, but I went to college for radio as a kid. And I'm just wondering, like, what are they, like this September, like a couple of weeks away, are kids going to radio school like this fall? Like, how do you take their money? And again, that's just, off the top of my head. You asked me what we think, and it's just one thought I've had about the business, that there are going to be kids that are going, and I know they'll be bullshitting them about podcasting and other forms, but still, kids are going and they're taking their money for radio school, and it's
And
just
they're getting in debt.
I would just like to know how that whole system's working now. That's all. That's my thought.
I don't want you to think I don't care about the kids. I do. But as far as words of wisdom, or to finish off, back to Humble and Fred, who we're talking about, I would say what I've learned, or what we've learned from doing this for 13 years and then 35 years together, is that because a lot of people are trying to, because you asked this and you asked me in the break, how many of these have we done? And we're often asked to be on people's podcasts, and we have been very often asked for advice about doing a podcast. And so I've learned this, and I think I could speak for Fred when I say that. What we've been able to do is take our passion for radio, or passion for broadcasting, well into a time in our lives when all our peers from 1989 are retired or dead. And the biggest gift of all of this for us is to continue to be, and I'll quote him as saying, what you can't be silenced anymore if you're a former radio guy. If you've got enough, whatever motivation to do this, even if nobody's listening to it. That's sort of my biggest takeaway from our last 13 years. That I often say this to people. It's not the biggest money. It's not the biggest money we've ever made, and it's not the biggest audience we've ever had. But it's the most fun money we've ever made, and the most connected audience we've ever had.
Yes, and Howard refers to old radio people. Howard tells a story, and I forget who said it to you once, Howard. When it comes to hot talk radio, everybody's got one talk show in them. It's day 2 and day 3 and day 4 that you got to worry about. And we've noticed that about podcasting, because a lot of old radio people, or I how do you refer to them? People that had left the business and thought, yeah, I want to do that podcast thing like Humble and Fred.
Mhm.
It's alarming how many gave up so quickly because they realized they just didn't have it in them every day to churn out a couple hours of content. It's not easy.
And and I give you and I give ourselves credit because we're both pretty disciplined guys. And when we got together after we'd both been fired in July of 2011, we said, "Hey, we'll try this podcast thing, but we're going to do it like a radio show. We're going to do it every day, whether anyone's listening or not. We're gonna make it our job until it became our job." And one of the things I would quote, and I get this from the world of golf, but everyone's interested in getting better. Everyone's interested in doing a podcast, but very few people are committed because committed looks way different and it's not for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That's it.
think the statistic I saw is there's something close to 3.5 million podcasts out there now.
Oh, geez.
And
I would think that's low.
Yeah. Well, the large majority of them don't make it to 25 episodes.
No.
I know. Yeah.
Listen, some of these so-called upstart, and I know of one in particular, upstart podcast networks. It's funny. They get all these people to contribute their podcast to their network, and then you scroll through them and click on them and see when the last show was that was performed by a lot of these podcasts, and it's like months ago. And that's like dead meat. You're better off to take it down than to have that.
So of the tens of thousands in the comedy category, which is what we're in, yes, we are, on Apple iTunes, we're regularly somewhere in the top 200, which is amazing because there's only about 10 Canadian ones in there. So that's kind of, and we're in the same category as Seth Meyers and Smartless and all these others. But our claim to fame, and this is where I'll leave you. We are the most uploaded podcast. No one's uploaded more shows than we have in the 13 years we've been doing this. We've uploaded thousands of episodes. We're not the most listened to, but we're definitely the most uploaded. And I don't know, that's not going to get us in the Radio Hall of Fame, but there is some satisfaction to it.
Well, we're after Spotify right now saying, come on, man, start paying for uploads. Come on. Start paying for uploads.
How come you don't pay for uploads?
I'd sit here all night uploading things.
All right. I hope any of that was of use to you there. And sir, other Fred, I hope that you've stopped dying for a while.
Thank you. I hope so too. Although my pacemaker battery is dying a little faster than the doctors projected. So I could be going in for number 7 soon.
So quickly, Leonard, just a question to you. So when you croak, what's it like? Did you see the lights and did you see the Lord and all that stuff people talk about? What was it like when you say you had literally passed out? Do you recall any moment of like, whoa, that was wacky? No?
Well, at the risk of not selling more books.
Okay. Sorry.
No, I have never seen a light. I don't discount that other people have. I guess it's a very individual experience. I have had a number of the out-of-body experiences which were just effing bizarre.
Right.
Bizarre, beyond mention and exhausting. But, it's not a hobby I suggest people get into.
No, I get it. Yeah. But I've heard too, when you die, I'm sorry, Howard, go ahead.
I was going to say, you don't recommend people just like start dying for funsies. What, were you going to make a poo joke?
Oh, I was going to say, I've heard when people die, they shit themselves. Is that true?
Yeah. A lot of times, there's this thing called the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
That controls your digestive
What happens
tract.
in the vagus nerve,
Often doesn't stay in the vagus nerve.
No, exactly.
So you died and then you just keep shitting yourself.
Yeah, it didn't happen to me, but it happens a lot when people get hung. Or electrocuted.
I guess
so. Your whole system just, it's not the priority keeping the goods in.
No, exactly. Well, it wouldn't be crazy Fred interview if we hadn't ended on some shit humor.
Yeah, I was expecting like a fart joke. So
you got it. Listen, we forget all that profound stuff. Forget that. What about did you shit 20 times when you died?
Yeah, that might have been a better book title. I don't know.
The summer I shit myself 20 times because it died.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I hope you got some stuff there you can use.
Oh, this has been golden, guys. Thank you so
yeah.
much.
All right.
Okay,
man.
Freddie.
And don't forget to tell people to listen to Humble and Fred. You can get us wherever, Spotify, or any wherever podcasts are available. And more information at humbleandfredradio.com.
And don't just download the podcast, listen to it for God's sake.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even care about that. No, just download it a bunch.
Download's okay.
Yeah, downloads are fine.
Okay. Thank you to the audience for tuning in to this unbelievable episode with Humble and Fred. Please like, subscribe, share, hit the notification button, and get the word out for their podcast and for my podcast. And have yourself a great week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Fred. That was great. We appreciate